Shudu, you had an interesting presentation today at Mandela Day with this Tech Talk Johannesburg. Can you give us the outline of your conversation, when you started it and how you got to here?
I started it with basically framing that the SDGs are not just goals on paper, but they actually reflect stories at grassroots level that need to be addressed. Sometimes when you're looking at the SDGs, there's such a complex, high-level concept, but when you actually bring them down to the fundamental of what they are, is that those are people's stories, those are people's lives, and they need to be addressed in order to make sure that we don't perpetuate the things that are going wrong with our society right now.
And with your involvement around mental health, what kind of actions do you do? Because as you know, it's a decade of actions, and I think part of your story was about people taking actions more than anything.
The actions, I advocate for mental health education. Like, mental health is a broader scope, but mental health education to me is where we start. People fear what they do not know. And what I notice through the work that I do, through my advocacy, is that when we tell stories, when we make people feel seen in their experiences, that's where we start to actually get real action. Because for the most part, in our communities, especially in Black communities, as soon as you say, I've got anxiety, that's already like, what are you talking about?
Sure.
But as soon as you have conversations, you realize that, oh, my grandmother and this person also struggled with the same thing, but we just couldn't label it and have the right languaging for it. So in how I advocate is advocating for mental health support, is making sure that I use the stories that I get from the different works that I do as a mental health advocate, as an author, as a UNFPA regional champion for East and Southern Africa. Take those stories and make people realize that this concept of the decade of action, those things that are on paper, those are real people. So we can't just be stagnant and speak and not act on them, because the more we take time, the more young girls are suffering, the more young people are without opportunities, the more people are uneducated, and we still expect them to compete with the rest of the world. We just actually further widening the gap of inequality between the haves and the have-not, without addressing the fundamentals and the structural barriers that actually exist right now.
You mentioned in your talk about the period of COVID-19 and how this issue really came afore. Is there been any change, you think? What are the numbers saying?
It's actually so interesting. This morning, I was speaking to someone on the phone, and they were sharing a story about how a lot of people have to sell houses that they bought during COVID, because that's when things were like incredibly cheap, and now they've gone up by about 40%. And then I was like, oh, we actually still recovering, because I think it's lost on us that COVID, yes, still exists, but a lot of people are still recovering from everything that they lost. People lost loved ones, jobs, livelihoods, like they lost themselves. Because I was even saying, physically, I'm not the same person I used to be. I struggle to breathe the same way that I used to breathe. I struggle to tackle tasks physically that I used to do the same way I used to tackle them in the past, because I had COVID 4 times. So it's like realizing that we're still playing catch up with our lives, and we should actually give each other grace. But as a global community, when we speak about economic recovery, we must also think about physical and mental health recovery, where a lot of people lost family and friends, and they're still recovering from that. A lot of people's health is not the same, and we're still recovering from that. So I feel like the COVID-19 pandemic, as we do with everything else as a human race, we try to rush to the next thing and then sweep it under the carpet, but this is not something that we can do, especially because we have a silent pandemic, which is the mental health pandemic, where people are suffering. So more investment needs to be made. Mental health needs to be integrated into the public health system and also the education system, especially at early childhood development level. We can't say that it's gone, because some people are still living with the reality of what has happened.
That was one of your calls to asking business to really improve the way they interact with the subject. Do you think South African business, especially even small business, do they really incorporate that action, or is it about just dumping funding and moving along?
No, I've actually been, I think, where was I? I was at, I think it was Deloitte, if I'm not mistaken, but not just them. Like, I've worked with a few corporates and have had conversations with a few corporates, and they have incorporated mental health into their work or work culture in general. Because there was a study that was shown, I think it was 2 years ago, I was in Zambia, and they said more than $3 billion is lost from businesses or the economy because we don't deal with mental health illnesses, or the mental health of employees is not taken care of. How do you expect someone to be productive if they're not okay psychologically?
Sure.
So I think most businesses are catching up to it now. I don't want to say they're not doing anything, but I think it's important to follow through, not just for the employees, but actually investing in organizations like SADC and many other NPOs that are doing the work on the ground, installing support groups in different villages, because we can't speak about wanting to increase employment or raising a youth with agency when at grassroots level they need help psychologically.
Today is also a special day that the president is giving a State of the Nation. What would you like to see in that statement, including the subject of mental health?
I think, like I said, the prioritization of mental health into the public health system. I think we can have these conversations in TEDx and all of these things, but it's really important to integrate that and make sure that it's integrated into the health system, but not only the public health system, as something that is accessible to a lot of South Africans, but also into the education systems. I've had conversations with people in the education department about integrating mental health education into the schooling curriculum. And the reason I did that was because of the many stories of children dying by suicide. In Namibia, the youngest student who died by suicide was 9 years old. That's a 9-year-old child. So if we're not integrating that at ECD level, then what are we doing? We're expecting a society that's empowered, that can tackle issues, that can help build the sustainable future that we want to see, the country that we want to see. But the youth needs help. The youth wants to feel seen. We need to integrate that. And we need to make sure that we normalize these conversations where it's not just, oh, we're speaking at a TEDx and then we keep it moving. No, let's normalize these conversations in our societies, because young people, not just young people, men are dying silently from mental health illnesses. And if we don't address it, we are just going to be moving slowly towards our goals, because there's no agency that currently exists without mental health empowerment.
You mentioned Limpopo in your story, which was really, really powerful and impactful. What would you say as hope as today, as I said, that's going to be the State of the Nation address? What do you think we should, even including the media, in telling the story of Limpopo?
Then the story of Limpopo just shows what happens when we just normalize the things that are wrong in our society. She was 10 years old, even before that actually, and she had to take care of 2 brothers. Barely had food to eat, had to use newspapers, and like I said, Mpho is just the name that I'm using for this. It's an actual person, and for her privacy, I didn't want to use her real name. But she had to use newspapers on test days, and you still say that education is the key to economic emancipation and liberation. But then what about the structural barriers that currently exist on the ground? So in telling that story, let's tell the truth of what is actually happening on the ground. Let's tell their stories, not the high-level stories only of like, okay, SDG 4, education, quality education. Okay, what about the things that affect education? I think one of the speakers spoke about how the SDGs are interlinked. You can't speak about technological advancement and economic prosperity without speaking about education. But you also can't speak about education when children are going to school without food, they don't have access to clean water, they don't have access to adequate health services. How do you expect that SDG 4 to be achieved? You know? So like I said before, it's just prioritizing it. Yeah.
Shudu, thank you for joining us at the BRICS Africa channel.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate the work you do.
Thank you.